I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, good morning. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Of course, as we start off, please go to imixwhatilike.org at your earliest convenience and subscribe there so you don't miss any of the work that I and my colleagues and comrades do beyond these live streams. Follow at I Mix What I Like on all your relevant social media, and make sure you like, subscribe, share, invite, all that good stuff to both the live if you're here, to the replay if you're catching this later, and invite people to join the conversation. Please, if you're in the comments and chats, welcome and get right to it, because we'll get to you as soon as possible and involve your comments and questions in the discussion. And before we go any farther, I want to do again my pitch and plea that you all support political prisoners and those incarcerated just in general. And I think it's pretty cool to be able to say that I got to communicate a little bit with Jalil Muntaqin about, the latest and what his situation is. And he has encouraged that we continue to do what I will do again now, to invite people to support him and all other political prisoners in their struggles, getting the word out, getting information, support by going to the JerichoMovement.com and finding ways to support all of the political prisoners who are covered in great depth and at great length there. So please do that. And a quick shout out to those of you, a few of you have sent, have been kind enough to send a few dollars my way in support of this show, this effort. And I appreciate that and am deeply appreciative of that, and want to publicly thank those who have done that, and to let you know that all of that money is going right over here to the Jericho movement, though I definitely appreciate it. And, again, while I, anyway. So we want to do what we can to help support that effort as well. All right, and continue to. So, but without further ado, I want to bring up our next guest, who is going to be busy today, and as she has been for a while. But and we'll discuss some of that later in a minute, because she's going to be on with some of my comrades later tonight at 7:00, and we'll promote that. As well, 7:00 Eastern Standard Time. So you can get almost a full day with our next guest. And in the interim, in between that, by the way, if you can stick around with us after this discussion at 1:30, we're going to be joined by two of my favorite broadcasters and activists and comrades and artists, Brother Kaba, who is of African Deep Thought, and Netfa Freeman of Black Alliance for Peace, Pan-African Community Action, Voices with Vision, talking about broadcasting Africa, talking about the way in which Africa and African people throughout the diaspora are covered journalistically and in popular media and otherwise. So please stick around for all of that. But anyway, joining me this morning, again, I'm very happy to have her back with us, is Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly, who is currently the 2020-21 visiting scholar in the Race and Capitalism Project at the University of Chicago. And she is also currently an assistant professor of Africana Studies and Political Science at Carleton College. But she is here today, among many of the other things she is doing and working on, she's here today to talk to us and with us about her number 5 top 21 Boston Review essay of the year, Caste Does Not Explain Race. So good morning to you, Dr. Burden-Stelly, and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
So I have a lot I want to ask you about. I know the people in the comments and chats have already begun, and they have a lot that they want to bring up as well. But I happen to have watched a clip again of just as I was preparing for this conversation, of a classic discussion that Toni Morrison had, the late Toni Morrison had, with Charlie Rose, and where he asked her a question. I used to show it in my classes all the time, where he asked her this question. Basically, a long story short, asking her about why haven't you sort of grown or evolved beyond just talking about race or talking about Black people in your work? And she had this great answer, which was basically to say, there in her, I'm not doing her justice, but to simply say there is nothing immature or wrong or incomplete about having conversations in my work that center Black people or speak to Black audiences. So as I read your essay again, I was thinking, just as an initial question, isn't the real problem with books and work like the one you're critiquing in Isabel Wilkerson's just the simple fact that it's really targeting a white affluent audience?
It's a leading question. I think there are many problems with the book, but I think, the fact that it is outwardly oriented toward white elites or white groups whose hearts and minds she thinks she can change. I think that problem is twofold. Number one, I think that it shapes the types of solutions that you offer up, right? And it also shapes the way that you come to particular types of conclusions. And so if it is that white people are your audience, then you have to come up with solutions that center them. And this is the great paradox of white supremacy. On the one hand, white people are the problem, right? That Black people are subjected to racism, but the problem is a white problem. But at the same time, when you center white people as a solution, then they become sort of the central sort of answer to the problem. And this is a paradox, but if we understand that those who are racialized and those who are oppressed and those who are marginalized, number one, are the majority of the world, and number two, are the actual solution, then this is what allows us to move away from that sort of conundrum that can arise where the solution to the problem is the solution to the problem, right? And so the second problem with the book is not simply that it's geared towards white elites, but also that it centers the ideas, analysis, and understanding of Black elites, right? Again, so my reading of this book is that the problem with the US society and what makes it a caste system is that it constantly reminds exceptional Black people of their Blackness, that no matter how much they accumulate, no matter how much they achieve, no matter how much they integrate particular spaces, they're still Black. And that's the real violence of the society, which, as we know, that's sad. It sucks, when you go to a restaurant and a waiter doesn't wait on you, or when you're Oprah and you go to buy a bag in France and people think you can't afford it. That really hurts one's feelings. But that's not the problem. That's not the structural problem that we need to be focusing on. And so it's an elite problem that has both white and Black manifestations, I would say.
Yeah, and of course we're talking about Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Thank you very much.
I bought this paperweight.
Wow.
I bought it.
Fair enough, right? I mean, and glad you're going to be able to make some lasting use of it. But I didn't read the book, so I wanted to start with that. I've read your critique a couple of times actually, and am familiar with sort of this, if I can call it this, a genre of books that I mean, her book does have a genre or class or a lineage of sorts in terms of its approach. And you talk about it in terms of this sort, as I understood it at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, this broader tradition or struggle between talking about race, as I think you just were describing there, as disconnected from material conditions, or the, as you put here in terms of Oliver Cromwell Cox, I want to ask you to talk about here. You say that what Cox does, sort of in contradistinction to what Wilkerson and those like her do, is to put class struggle, racial violence, and relentless political class competition at the founding of the capitalist world system starting in 1492. So could you talk a little bit more about that distinction you draw out between what Cox's tradition represents and what Wilkerson's tradition of writing about race represents, in that, yeah, and what the two of them are not doing or doing in distinction from one another?
Yeah, so something that's key to Cox's analysis and something that was in so this essay went through several drafts. But something that was in the first draft is that he focuses on the sort of the rise of the modern capitalist system in 1492. But the other thing that he does in Foundations of Capitalism is talk about these early capitalist cities. And so like Venice, Genoa, and I always forget the other one. But anyway, there's these early capitalist cities that have the characteristics that go on to constitute later capitalist societies. So like Great Britain and then the United States, right? That these become capitalist leaders. So what he argues is that, and this is sort of where he departs from Lenin, is that like it's not that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. It's constitutive of the capitalist system itself, because the ways in which a entity becomes the leadership of the system is through capturing foreign exchange and foreign markets, and then dominating foreign populations. That this is the sort of characteristic feature of a capitalist system, and what leads to a particular society becoming the leadership in that system. And that's important because what it shows is that capitalism is fundamentally rooted in domination, not only within nations, but among nations. And so this is why he's considered to be one of the first he is considered to be the progenitor of world systems theory. And so he argues that over time, racial logics develop in tandem with the rise of the capitalist system because of the ways in which these forms of dominating whole populations are endemic and constitutive of the system. So Cox argues that whereas the caste system does not start as a system of economic exploitation or a system of hierarchy rooted in domination. Now, there's contention as to whether that's a right or wrong analysis of caste prior to the rise of capitalism, that there is no system of race relations that is not exploitative and that is not fundamentally rooted in domination and subjection. And so it's simply a different, and so for him, they're simply different systems, right? Caste and race and class are different. A class system and a caste system are different, and then race relations rooted in a class system are fundamentally different from the Indian caste system. And so to me, I read Cox in also sort of an intellectual community with people like Walter Rodney, even with people like contemporary people like Gerald Horne, people like Louise Thompson Patterson, all of my squad, which is predominantly Black communists and socialists, who are looking at the intimate links between capitalism and imperialism and between racial and class domination. So to me, these are people who take the Negro question very, very seriously and understand that this is a particular enunciation of capitalist exploitation. So that's one mode of scholarship, right? This Wilkerson mode of scholarship, number one, is descriptive. It is not analytical. There's no analytical value to it. It describes particular relations, and it's based on stories and experiences, which can be important in concretizing or in sort of giving examples of broader structural analyses, but that's not what she does. The other
because the way you describe it, that's the core of her method. It seemed. If did I read you correctly in that? Like that's it. Like she's not. There's no sort of social science at all behind it. It's just like I didn't get treated right at a restaurant or in an elevator or and I mean and that was like almost her entire method. Did I read you right? Am I getting that right?
I think she draws very heavily on those stories, and then she offers these histories, but they're not, basically what they are scenes of things that happened before, right? It's not, there's no historiography to it. There's no sort of historical arc, except they were racist then, they're racist now, Caste. That's essentially, I mean, that is essentially what one takes away from it. And I think that what most people enjoyed about her work is the stories, right? Because again, stories can give a sort of relatable example of whatever dynamics one is describing. But the problem is that these are not examples, they serve as the evidence, if that makes sense. And so that type of scholarship, it's focused on behavior and attitudes, right? It's focused on interpersonal relationships as important, as just as important as the sort of structural dynamics, right? That the structural dynamics are indeed manifested, or they're best sort of understood through these interpersonal dynamics. So it's a different project, and it is fundamentally predicated in the belief that, like, if people gave up their privilege, if they had empathy, so empathy is big here, if they had empathy for the suffering of the oppressed, particularly the suffering of Black elites, then this would resolve the sort of racial problem that we have in the United States. The other problem with that is she equates this to sort of Nazi Germany. So there's a number of issues, but one thing we know about Nazi Germany is that was a system of extermination, right? This was not to maintain a caste order or otherwise, that this was a system of extermination. And to equate these three completely different social systems just becomes very problematic, and shows the sort of arbitrary nature in which she's just taking all forms of oppression and saying, see, all of these systems have oppression, therefore they're all caste. And that's a problem.
You say something, and you may have already sort of answered this, but if you want to elaborate, I'd love to hear it, because well, of the many things that I've highlighted here that I was drawn to and want to ask about, you said here that, and again, in terms of the broader context, you said, quote, the recent publication of Isabel Wilkerson's widely acclaimed Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, returns to caste to explain U.S. racial hierarchy at a moment when wealth polarization, racial strife, and white supremacist revanchism, and I had to look that word up, I'm not even gonna lie, are again on the rise. And you say that this was, if I caught it correctly, you say that this is also this sort of the timing, somewhat similar in terms of what was happening at the moment Cox's work came out, and the response to his work is similar to what Wilkerson's work is meant to negate in this moment.
Yeah.
Did I get that right? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. So the Caste school arises in like the 1930s and 1940s. What's happening in the 1930s? The Great Depression. Alongside the Great Depression is a massive increase in anti-Black racial violence, alongside the very, very discriminatory way in which the New Deal is implemented. And so at this time, at a time when there's like a protracted struggle for resources, right? A rate that is rooted in sort of in the extant racial hierarchy, there's this turn to explain race relations in terms of caste, right? Like it's birth, it's immutable, it's unchangeable, because it has to do with heritage, custom, and then the economic system is born out of that custom, as opposed to the custom being born out of that economic system. Now, the other thing that Cox points out is that 1930s caste, 1930s, 1940s caste school of race relations was a return from the 1890s, or from the late 1870s, 1880s moment. What is happening in that moment? Reconstruction. And so what does it mean in the context of Reconstruction to talk about a caste system at a time when Blacks are, when the question is, how are Black people going to be integrated as freedmen, right, as free people into a socioeconomic system? This was another moment in which this caste explanation arose. And so it seems that this caste explanation arises at times when the question of distribution of resources in the time of sort of transition or crisis arises. if that makes sense. And so it's a turn away from the questions of economics and distribution and exploitation to talk about hearts, minds, custom, heritage, these sorts of things. And it just, and it, as they say, right, as I think it's Mark Twain or whatever, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Mm-hmm. And so the question, it's an ethical question. Why do we keep returning to this caste thing? The other thing Cox points out is that when they talk about caste, they really talk about race. And so you can literally exchange the word caste for race in the analysis. But why the mystification at a time when clarity and precision is really, really important to understand what's happening and therefore to understand what needs to be done?
Why do you think that they do that? What would be your sort of elevator pitch answer real quick? Like why what is being served by this constant return to caste?
White supremacy. I mean, I think that there can be a sort of fatigue with trying to keep race at the fore, right? Trying to get people to see, white people in particular, to see, like, racism has an economic base. Like racism has a base in what people get, how much they get, and who has a right to live and die. And it seems to me that simply replacing the word caste with the word race, perhaps in their mind, allows them to have this particular type of analysis without using the word race. I think that that's the charitable reading. I think, yeah, I don't know.
When I was reading your essay, what keeps coming back to me is this is a way to keep white people feeling like they can hear conversations about race without having to actually give up anything materially. So like when you say, for instance, Wilkerson presents the perception of Black poverty as a more significant problem than Black poverty itself. Like I thought that was a great line and says a lot about what makes this kind of work appealing to these affluent white audiences that make these books become so popular. And it reminded me again of the one moment in the 2016 campaign where I won't go so far as say an affinity or an appreciation for Hillary Clinton, but in this one moment, anyway, when she was accosted by some Black Lives Matter activists, and she says to them, "Well, what do you want?" And then they say, for you to something about ending white supremacy. And she's saying, well, she said to them, I can't make white people change I can't change white people's attitudes. So she was like, you have to have a program, a plan. And in that moment, again, I understood her logic because on the one hand, she's saying white people will hear all day that they're racist and white supremacist and they'll even, they'll listen to Black people. They'll feel like they're going through some changes and they'll watch the Black content on Netflix or whatever, or they'll buy something from a Black business. But in terms of real material change or redistribution or revolutionary adjustments, that's where they become more uncomfortable. That they wouldn't want to hear it. So when I was reading your essay, that's what I was thinking of. So for instance, I made a note that because you said also radical change must then flow from. Radical change must then flow from dominant caste individuals who recognize the plight of the quote unquote subordinate caste and choose to reject the system. Cox, on the other hand, posits that any effort to change the racial order of the United States must attack the racially hierarchical political economy, not perceptions and attitudes. So in my note here, I said targeting a white audience they are always happy to hear about their changing attitudes and not redistribution.
Yeah, I mean, but what's interesting about that Hillary Clinton anecdote that you just shared is that, if the Black Lives Matter protesters said they want to end white supremacy, she automatically equated that with changing white people's attitudes. Like, I can't change white people's attitudes. That is not how, and the exact point is that is not how you attack white supremacy. It reminds me of this quote by Kwame Ture. I think at the time he was still called Stokely Carmichael, when he said, if white people want to lynch me, that's their problem. If white people have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. So it doesn't matter. White people can think whatever they want. They can feel however they want to feel. That's not the problem. The problem is like, all right, we'll quit stealing people's shit all over the world, number one. Number two, quit rationalizing your theft through these discourses of Black laziness, Black criminality, Black lewd and lascivious behavior. And number three, stop making it seem as if you just had more education, if you just understood better, if you just knew more, then you would act differently. We know that's not the case, because people like to point out how many white working class people, which is redundant to them because they think the working class is white. But anyway, that only white working class people voted for Trump, but a majority or plurality throughout all of the socioeconomic demographics voted for him. So the more education you get, it's not as if that completely eradicates the problem. Because then what arises is the problem of liberalism. Sure, you might get rid of like white sheet, bald white supremacy, but then you get people like Obama, who as people like Ajamu Baraka point out, is a white supremacist, but he's Black. But you know, in the white, you get these white liberals who, even they're paternalistic, their care is oppressive, their solutions are short-sighted. So I mean, you just, you know, I'm kind of like ranting at this point, but like I think maybe, okay, listen, maybe economics is not the solution. Let's try it though. Let's just start there. Let's just try reparations. Let's just try redistribution. Let's just try, you know, socialism. And if it fails, fine. But let's try it. We don't want, like, we will have every single other solution but that. Okay, maybe it's not the solution, but let's try it. We tried all this other failed stuff. Like, let's just see what happens.
Yeah, no, you did a better job, but that was sort of the point I was trying to get, where in that one brief moment, Hillary Clinton was actually exposing the correctly what the situation was, that going to white people and saying, we just want you to be not to change your attitude, and that means ending white supremacy is not going to anyway. So I want to get to some of the comments in the chat, but there are two quick points that I want to raise, and then your response can obviously be as long or short as you like. But they're my favorite parts of your essay. And the first refers to the importance of rejecting the caste analysis because of its suppression of histories of rebellion. And then the other one is your reference to Cheikh Anta Diop, who, as I talked to you briefly before we went live, is, I think, underappreciated in the quote unquote materialist community, and he is underappreciated for his materialism in the African-centered community. That's my quick, I'm not putting that on you, but that's just my quick, But I just want to read this one thing you say, because you say here, again, referring to Oliver Cox, history is on Cox's side. Race relations in the United States have always been contested and unstable. The staggering number of slave rebellions, urban uprisings, and racial insurgencies that pepper U.S. history attest to its ongoing racial antagonism. So too, he argued, do the irregularity of interracial practices and discrimination and the constant attacks on the color line by Blacks as well as whites who disregard rule favored by the ruling class, end quote. Could you elaborate on that a little bit in terms of what Wilkerson and those who follow this caste line do to these histories of rebellion?
Yeah, so that also is in response to Cox's idea that there was less resistance throughout the history of caste. And again, caste scholars, there's some caste scholars that say it wasn't until the sort of collapsing of colonialism on top of caste that we started to see protracted struggle. There's others to say that, that there was resistance throughout. Again, I'm not a caste scholar, and my essay was less about caste as such and more about why race ain't caste, right? Especially in the context of the United States. But if you have a caste system that is rigid, immutable, unchangeable, then resistance is superfluous, right? It doesn't really matter. And I think that what Cox is trying to convey when he talks about how from their inception, race relations are unstable, they're contested, is that it is always antagonistic. It is always, there is no point in history where there was not resistance, where there was not a struggle against this system. There's nothing natural about it. There's nothing preordained. There's nothing ontological, if you will. That's the, you know, the new way to really think about caste, if you really want to. But like, that's not it. It is a material, it's material antagonism, right? And so he emphasizes that point to again distinguish race relations rooted in capitalist domination from a caste system. So there's one caste scholar who really takes exception to Cox's analysis of caste. And we've had a couple conversations, and his position is that Cox did not go to India and study caste, right? And that, so he misunderstands when he talks, or he's wrong about this idea that there wasn't resistance, that it was a sort of a less antagonistic society. Whether or not that's the case, fine. There was always antagonism here, right? From the first time that Black people set foot here, there was always resistance. And I think that becomes very, very important, that there are cadres of Black people over time who have accepted the status quo, but the overall, even if you think about it, even the Tommiest of Toms have generally been against at least white supremacy, right? They've at least been, they've at least thought that the but-for logic, as I call it, that the United States will be great but for racism. So they've at least been against the ways in which racism presents a barrier to Black ascension, right? So it's never been something that Black people have like, you right, we inferior, or like, take our shit, like never. So.
Well, I mean, because you do point out, I forgot where, but somewhere you do point to some in the caste scholarship who make the argument that once in a caste system, there's less rebellion because people have accepted their caste status. Whether that's an accurate read or not, I guess is a separate question. But that, I think, is at least something you point. Some have at least argued, which would then suggest, if I'm reading that correctly or hearing that correctly, that what caste scholarship akin to what Wilkerson is doing is meant to suggest that other than some of the personal grievances suffered by the Oprahs and the Wilkersons, that Black people have more or less accepted this inferior caste position. And she's now asking whites to change their attitudes so that caste position can be changed. Is that?
It's not exactly that. Essentially,
Okay.
What she's arguing is that Cox is wrong to say that there was no resistance in caste societies, that there was, and this is why she draws on like Ambedkar, and like she's saying that he ignored somebody like Ambedkar, who at the time that Cox is writing is critiquing the caste system from the perspective of being a Dalit. Here's the problem with that. She don't focus on no caste struggle. She focuses on the ways that individuals fought back against the caste system. She don't focus on no uprising. She don't focus on no social movements. And we know that there was at least, for example, the Dalit Panthers. We know that this is the case, throughout the 20th century, right? But again, when she's talking about caste, she's focusing on these anecdotal stories and her perception of what's happening. And when she talks about challenges, again, she's talking about basically individual and intellectual challenges to the caste system. So she's not really making her point. It's just lazy and raggedy, And again, and so I think that some of the best points that have been raised from caste scholars to me since this piece came out is we really need to think about how capital. There's a way to understand caste as always having been linked to capital and property. And again, this is what Gialt points out. So Gialt talks about caste in the pre-colonial African society, that there was no property relations that had anything to do with caste, and that indeed, and in fact, it was frowned upon to to exploit or oppress somebody in a lower caste than you, because that's not how caste relations operated. He said that it was the Aryans, that is to say the Indian caste system, that ascribed property, private property, and a sort of economic working to the caste system. So again, all of that to say, like, Wilkerson, to me, she doesn't study caste. It's a lazy book. And there's no point that's made well. And all it serves to do is like sort of distort what's going on in all three of these societies she talks about, more so than illuminate, all to the point of sort of like, if people would just relate to one another better, if people would just, be kinder, be nicer, and give up their privilege, then that's a solution to the forms of domination in any society, really.
By the way, I also thought it was compelling, again, comparing the moments when you said that in his 1962 book, Capitalism and American Leadership, Cox argued that American exploitation came before beliefs about specific groups of people. Quoting him saying that since any conception of a people being capitalistically exploitable tends to breed universal contempt for them, it seems manifest that the very spirit of the system must subside if respect for backwards people is to be assured, which is how I read your point about we should at least just try socialism or reparations, at least just try to see what happens, right? But then you also say, but in terms of comparing these moments, I think that your next line or the next paragraph is really compelling, because you said that for this reason, Cox contended that Cold War anti-communism worked to preserve the capitalist-rooted racial order, especially in the charge that the demand for equal rights for Black Americans was communist activity. This was the context for the Caste School's decision to evade a critique of capitalism. It also helps to explain the marginalization of Cox's book in the late 40s. In the post-war era, texts sympathetic to socialism were generally marginalized. Those who did engage in the book tended to dismiss the text as too polemical, deterministic, and unscientific. And then you proceed to sort of go through this history where you refer to some of the works that you've mentioned already and some others. And it just feels, I don't know, I was reading it and kind of laughing a little bit, like this feels like it's just like body blow, just one swing after another of just, and it seems like you didn't read this and you didn't pay attention to that and didn't see this. And we don't see Du Bois. We don't even see Marable's critique of capitalism in Black America. I mean, all of this stuff. And I thought again of this moment now where we're getting, renewed, anti-Russia this and China that, and it all sort of has that similar kind of backdrop. It feels like to the point in time you're talking about here. They're not using that language, but a Red Scare, anti-communist type of thing.
Yeah, and so I refer to what you're describing as like intellectual McCarthyism, like Wilkerson engages in intellectual McCarthyism, because it's like there was no Black communist or socialist writing about this thing, right? And it's like it's the disregard. So let me just say, the whole reason I wrote this piece is a disregard for Cox, right? She literally has 3 paragraphs on the man. I couldn't abide that. I just could not abide that, because it's like, you don't have to agree, but you must substantively engage, because this was a trenchant critique. He was somebody that really carefully studied the Caste School of Race Relations and pointed out across several works why it is that this was incorrect, or at the very least problematic. And to dismiss him in 3 paragraphs, I just cannot abide that. And then to also, to talk about Du Bois, but not all of his materialist analysis, and to miss this whole, as you said, like this whole body of anti-capitalist scholarship is just, it's negligent. And I think many people, academics, are guilty of this, that either they might cite a text, but they don't engage it. They might cite like a Black radical text, but they don't engage it. Right? Or they'll read it into some other more palatable framework, right? Like feminism or something, which is important, but like, we have to recover these anti-capitalist, these communist, socialist, even anarchist texts and read them, and not only read them, but like use them as a basis for our own scholarship, or we're going to get this. The origin of my discontent. How about that?
How about that? Right. Shout out to Keto Swan. Yeah, I made a note of that line too. The Tommy is the Toms was that's like the subtitle of or a chapter of the next piece of work. As I'm looking through some of the chat is live. I don't see as many questions immediately.
Whoa.
If you see something you want to respond to, please let me know. Because I definitely wanted to have you take a moment to at least talk about some of the work you have coming up and sort of redirect us as we start, unfortunately, moving towards the end, not an end, but towards an end. I'd love to hear you, get towards, what exciting is on the horizon and some of the names that you are excavating. Or reminding us of, maybe that's too strong a word, but reminding us of.
This is that was an interesting comment about
about
Caste. See, Dalits fighting for 2,000 years against settler colonialism, racist supremacy, Modi. See, this is, but if you look at the like, what is it? If you okay. Never mind.
Oh, that was about to be good.
I'm not a Caste scholar. Oh, can you speak on your work on Doxy Wilkerson? Absolutely. That was the last question. Okay, so
okay, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, yeah, I missed that. Go ahead. Oh, I see. Yeah.
So basically, so in contradistinction to a book like Caste, part of what I am invested in, and part of the reason why I return to Cox is because I'm trying to think, racial capitalism has arisen in our sort of in the intellectual commons. And part of what I try to think about is who are the people who are actually theorizing what we now call racial capitalism prior to its naming, and in a way that moves away from the political philosophical, or that is more of the political economy as opposed to the political philosophical, which, as Peter James Hudson argues, is Cedric Robinson's project. Now, people can agree or disagree. I don't have a dog in that fight. But so when I look at like the Negro question writ large, right? Or I look at the, relations of development and underdevelopment, or these different types of discourses, I'm trying to think about how are these different scholars bringing together processes of racialization with modes of capitalist exploitation, and understanding these things as inextricably linked both within nations but also among nations. That's very, very important. And that is what Cox really gives us, is that there are dynamics within nations, and then there are racialized dynamics among nations, that understanding these together is very, very imperative to understanding the capitalist system. And so Doxy Wilkerson, along with a number of other people, is one of the people that I think about as an early theorist of racial capitalism through the lens of education. So Doxy Wilkerson is somebody who was a professor at Howard University. He left in I want to say, was it 1930 something? He left his teaching post at Howard University to become a professional revolutionary. So he joined the Communist Party. He wrote a lot. He worked in the Jefferson School of Social Science. He helped to develop some of their theoretical lines. There's a lot of interesting things in his archives. One is he got dragged by Harry Haywood on Race one time, which is funny. I'm gonna write an article about that at some point. But yeah, so that's Doxy Wilkerson. I want to spend more time in his papers at the Schomburg, but also to look at his early writings. He went to University of Kansas for his master's degree, and he had some writings in their newspaper. So I got a fellowship to go look at those writings, but the problem is that the pandemic hit, so I haven't gone yet. But he's somebody that nobody knows.
I didn't know that. That's good news, though. That's exciting to know about, though.
He's so important because how I discovered Doxy Wilkerson was actually in David Levering Lewis's interviews, which are in the David Levering Lewis papers, the interviews he conducted for his Du Bois biography. He did all of these interviews, and one of them was with Doxy Wilkerson. And not only with him, there was other interviews with people like Marvell Cook, where they talked about how kind and smart Doxy Wilkerson was. Then I stumbled on the People's Voice, which is a newspaper he edited. And then I was like, okay, let me look into this person. And then I found him and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, I got to write about this. I got to write about him because he's really, really important. He was part of like the Brain Trust, the Black Brain Trust. He was the vice president of the American Federation of Teachers. He was one of the researchers for Gunnar Myrdal. And let me just tell you, the reason why I love him is because he almost beat up Gunnar Myrdal. He said that they almost came to blows because Myrdal was lying. Like, Myrdal knew better than to talk about hearts and minds. He was like, he's supposed to be a socialist. He knew better. And so his analysis was disingenuous. He was disregarding all of this economic data that all these Black social scientists had gathered for an American dilemma. And, you know, so anyway, they almost fought. And I like a good beat down. This is the same reason I love William Monroe Trotter when him and his clique was about to beat up Booker T. Washington. So I think fisticuffs are important. I think if we brought them back in the academy, people would have a far different way of relating.
It's funny you said that. I used to argue all the time that if in terms of all the hip hop stuff that used to be discussed, that if MCs got a battle and dancers got a battle and DJs got a battle, how come the hip hop scholars don't battle? Yeah, I was trying to get it. I was trying to get at it. I was like, I'm with you on that. I love that sentiment. I see some folks asking about the 1619 project. I have not. Have you said anything publicly about that? I haven't. Do you have any thoughts to share on that?
I think that 1588 isn't equally. I think that there are many, many dates. I mean, I think that this delves into the diaspora wars. It's not really my bag. I think that it was a project that did work, that was important. But I think that it can serve to reify particular aspects of American mythology. I think that there are lots of good critiques out there. Like, I'm not a historian. I'm certainly not a historian of slavery. So I'm a punt on that one.
Okay. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. Before I forget, let me at least pull this up because I want to make sure while we got people here that they know that an extension of and more of what you're hearing here will be heard later this evening with the good people here. Do I see, is all the information here that is necessary? Yeah. 7 o'clock, Luke My Nation. Yeah. That's going to be a pretty heavy discussion. Anyway, so
I'm just going to be there for comic relief because what I'm supposed to say when Ajamu Baraka's on the panel, and I don't know this dude, but he looks smart too. And then you got the People's Prophetess, Jack. Stay on here. I'll just be on there. I have a cute dress on, but
No, if I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but John Curacao, right? He was one of the whistleblowers, and he was doing the show. He was a former CIA whistleblower, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that right? They'll tighten us up. The Luke Mons will tighten us up. But he used to, if I'm not mistaken, because he used to co-host the show with Brian Becker. I think that's him. Isn't that him? They'll tell me anyway. Anyway. But wait, you also there's another project you're working on about specifically Black radical women that I wanted you to say something about before you left as well. Thank you, Sister Jackie.
Okay.
Right. That's what, right. Work loud and clear. That's what I thought. Yeah. That's right. Anyway.
Yeah. See, they got these heavyweights and they got me. Talk about whatever history, I guess.
Whatever. Okay, so, I mean, you top 5. Come on now, they're not top 5.
Listen, that top 5 belongs to y'all. That doesn't really belong to me because what that means is that a lot of people read it. I wrote it, but a lot of people read it. So, we can't really claim these victories. It's like it would have been nothing without everybody. So thank you.
But I appreciate that response. But we all read it, and some of us more than once because it was dope and relevant and makes a lot of important points. So, I mean, you can't, it wouldn't, well, anyway, I'll just leave it there. I'll just stop.
Okay, let me mention a few things. So the Black women's project you mentioned is called Triple Jeopardy and World Revolution, 3 decades of political writings by Black Women Communists. That is co-authored with Jody Dean. Essentially what happened was one time Jody emailed me about a piece from Louise Thompson Patterson. I happened to be in the archive, the Temperament papers at that time. And so I was looking for it. And then we're like, you know what? We need to have a central location for like Black communists and fellow traveler women's writing, because there, to our knowledge, there's no resources like that. And so that's how that project came about. It includes a whole bunch of people, some who are card carrying Reds, some who are what I would say adjacent to the Communist Party, but all who were struggling for basically Black liberation in the context of a socialist world, generally with a particular focus on the role and the experience of Black women. It's largely African. It is mostly African American focused. And of course, it's not meant to be like the definitive anything. It's meant to be a starting point. So hopefully more of these types of collections will come about. Somebody else mentioned, yes, me, Jemima Pierre, and Peter James Hudson started a feature on Black Agenda Report called the Black Agenda Review, which is supposed to be a site to provide materials for, political education. We really want a space where all sort of opinions and approaches within the Black radical left can be represented. And so it's more like, intellectual or theoretical writings that we're trying to bring back, some that are unknown or forgotten. We also want commentaries on these kind of writings. We'll do book reviews, all sorts of stuff, but it's really dope. And it's really, really Black. It is Black and very Black and radical. So that's dope. What else? Thank you, Will. Oh, I know. What up, Will? Something about Doxy Wilkerson. So those are. Oh, I just want to say my biggest accomplishment of 2020 was joining Black Alliance for Peace. I'm still new. I'm still learning. I'm still doing. I'm just a rank and file, but I'm getting more integrated into the organization. I've learned so much from all of the comrades in there. So join Black Alliance for Peace. Donate. Go to the website. Read all the political education materials. Follow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that. I don't know if there's Instagram. Anyway, any other things I'm working on?
By the way, those who have
there's one more.
Oh, go ahead.
The last book, I'm co-authoring with an amazing scholar called Erin Kamugisha, a collection of Percy Henson's writing. Percy Henson is my dissertation advisor, but he is an amazing scholar of the Anglophone Caribbean, about state formation, economic development, elite domination, the Creole domination, and so we are collecting some of his writings from the 1990s to the present, and it's going to be dope. I think my epilogue, it presents Percy Henson as a theorist of racial capitalism with a particular focus on the Caribbean. So that's another project. We're going to launch that at the Caribbean Studies Association, I think, depending on what that's looking like. So those are the main projects I'm working on, along with my single author monograph. I might have mentioned that. Black Scare, Red Scare. It's about anti-communism and racial capitalism.
So you just got a couple things to look forward to. So those who are asking for us to have her back here, we obviously will. Please go back and check the archives at imixwhatilike.org for our interview earlier this year on Paul Robeson. We'll definitely be inviting Dr. Burden-Stelly back as often as we can. Brother Errol Henderson back with us. I don't know if you have time for any of this, but do you have an assessment of this?
What up, Errol? No, I don't. Hey, Dr. Henderson. Hey, y'all got to read his new book. The Revolution Will Not Be Theorized. It is a big, thick one, but it's a good one. I have not read the new biography, so I don't have any opinions, but I will move it up on my list since you asked. But your book is good, and I like it. Somebody asked about book recommendations. I have a stack of books right here. Could I just hold them up?
Sure. Bring them out.
They all, okay. Two Horns. The Dawning of the Apocalypse This one and the Apocalypse of Settler Colonialism. He has much of the same analysis as Cox, but updated and, with Gerald Horne's pithy and very historically rooted writings. We got The Mind of Oliver Cromwell Cox, which is a book that came out a while back that's about Oliver Cromwell Cox and the ways in which he came to his scholarly practice. Caste, Class, and Race. This is the book. It is thick, it is long, it's sometimes boring, but it's important. Race, Class, and the World System. This is a collection of excerpts of Oliver Cromwell Cox's writings, and it also has a really good introduction about him. And so this might be something good to read first before you delve into Cox's tomes, because it'll give you, you can get your feet wet, right? This is I actually teach this book in my economic development class. Then you got the trilogy, okay? Book number 1, Foundations of Capitalism. The second book is Capitalism. It's right here on the side. Capitalism and American Leadership. This is the second book in the trilogy. Third book, Capitalism as a System. This trilogy will tell you so much of what you need to know about capitalism. And he also has a very, very good critique of orthodox and traditional Marxism. Look out for something called the value theory of labor, as opposed to the labor theory of value. So that can be your winter reading.
Winter? How many winters?
The nuclear winter shit, we have all of that. But so those are just some readings. I think I'm gonna have on the Black Agenda Review. I'll have an extended essay. Review essay of Cox's work, so look out for that. Not anytime soon. It'll be like in November 2021, but it's coming.
I mean, that's fine. Got to have something to look forward to, because Lord knows we're going to go through a lot before we get there. Anyway, listen, Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly, I want to thank you for joining us again. Appreciate your work and your time as always. And we look forward to all this that's going to be coming up from you in the near future, or in the extended future. So
thank you for having me. I just want to end my sweatshirt, gentrification, keep residents in place. Our communities are not for sale. This is from the communitymovementbuilders.com. They got a lot of stuff. Check out that CMOS. I just discovered this organization. So support all of our Black radical stuff. We out here, and things are difficult and dark now, but Fidel Castro says revolutionaries are always optimistic, and we out here, we doing it. So
right on. All right, well, hey, thank you very much. On that note, we'll bid you adieu, and thank you very much again for joining us. And I want to thank all of you for joining us as well, for sticking through for this hour. Please, if you can, come back in about 90 minutes for our conversations with brothers Netfer Freeman and Kaba Akandunde, and about broadcasting Africa. And please go to imixwhatilike.org and get all of our past interviews, and sign up there so you don't miss stuff coming up in the future. A lot of good stuff coming. So please stick around and like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Stay in touch. Try to respond to your feedback, send your critiques, comments, queries, conundrums, catechisms, and cacophony. And as always, as Fred Hampton used to say to you, we will say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and we'll catch you next time. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.